Well, Polly, thank you. And good evening, everybody. Now, fear of being called racist was a direct contributor to the appalling grooming scandals that went on in Rotherham, in Rochdale, in Telford, and in other parts of the country too. It could have been stopped, but it wasn't, because the police and the authorities were scared that if they pointed the finger at one particular community, they would be accused of being racist. Well, today has seen a very big change in the language. Firstly, Suella Braverman, and by the way, it's her birthday today as well. Suella Braverman saying, in the vast majority of cases, it was British Pakistani men who were causing the abuse, and the Prime Minister being equally strong, saying political correctness must not hold us back from dealing with the perpetrators. Now, this sort of language we wouldn't have seen under the premierships of Boris Johnson, Theresa May or David Cameron. They are now really starting to talk tough. They're going to set up a task force to deal with it. Now, that phrase does make me rather think back to the days of Tony Blair, but they will also be doing their best to force people working in children's services that if they see any hint or suspicion of grooming, they are to report it. So there are some actions that are being proposed here. Well, I suppose you could say the same about the cross-channel boats. Lots of tough talk from the Prime Minister and from Suella Braverman, and yet, over the weekend, polling showing that 63% of the country don't think anything is going to materially change. So the question on grooming gangs is, will the tough talk lead to action? Tell me what you think. Farage at gbnews.uk. Now, Charlie Peters works for GB News. He is an investigative reporter. He produced an absolutely brilliant documentary film just a few months ago, Grooming Gangs, Britain's Shame. He's been up in Rochdale today. He interviewed Home Secretary Suella Braverman. Here's a clip of what she had to say.
Ultimately, silence enabled this abuse. Silence on the part of professionals, fear of being called racist, fear about cultural sensitivities, fear about inflaming cohesion in communities. It is absolutely vital that we call out the truth of what's been going on, and that's why mandatory reporting is an important tool in the armoury of measures that we're announcing today.
Yesterday, when you spoke about your incoming list of reforms, you said that, I think correctly, that British Pakistanis are disproportionately overrepresented in this kind of child abuse, with one Labour politician describing this commentary as dog whistle politics. What do you make of this?
It's not racist to tell the truth about what has been going on here in Rochdale or in Rotherham or in Telford. Local reviews and reports have confirmed that the grooming gangs scandal that has gone on here has been perpetrated by largely British Pakistani men. Now, it's important not to demonise a whole community, and the vast majority of British Pakistanis are law-abiding and straightforward people. But it is also clear to say that in these towns, and I've met victims today who've confirmed as much, bearing out their own experience, that there have been cultural trends in the practices that we've seen, and authorities and professionals have turned a blind eye out of fear of being called racist. Political correctness can no longer be an obstacle to taking action.
Well, Charlie Peters joins me now. Charlie, there's little doubt, in my view, that your very powerful documentary has actually helped to push the government into much, much tougher words, much tougher proposals, other than the language changing, which of itself, I accept, is significant. What do you think about their proposed actions and the likelihood that that's going to make any real difference on the ground?
Well, survivors and campaigners I spoke to this morning described the situation as one of cautious optimism. And I do share that, because I think the reason why I have such strong views on these policies is, as you note, I think they're kind of directly lifted from the recommendations we made in that documentary 2 months ago. The NCA-supported task force is something that we've been calling for at GB News for a while now. And though, Nigel, you suggested it has kind of Blairite connotations, the National Crime Agency has been absolutely vital pivotal in securing justice for grooming gang survivors in Rotherham, where they have secured hundreds of more survivors accessing support and many more prosecutions and convictions. They've been able to do that because they've parachuted in specialist officers who understand the situation and aren't tainted by local politics and local woke approaches to dealing with this issue. So I'm very keen on that policy indeed, and it was very interesting to hear the Home Secretary propose how she would assess its success going forward today. But also, there's this renewed sense of focus on the recording of ethnicity data. Now, we know that this is something that police forces across the country have completely failed to do, and this has given us a very narrow understanding of the issue and has allowed the wider commentary and politicians to avoid talking about it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think, a cynic would say this has all come 10 years too late, but I think you're right. I think the recording of ethnicity data is a very, very big step in the right direction. I agree with that. Do you think it took a Prime Minister and a Home Secretary who both came themselves from ethnic minority backgrounds for the Conservatives to find the courage to do this?
I think the problem we've had is not really the identity of the politicians, but we never really had the national conversation we needed about this issue when the lid blew off the scandal a decade ago. There was all this awkward discussion about the issue. There was very, very cautious, nervous and downright cowardly discussion of the demographics of the perpetrators, overwhelmingly Pakistani in many of the 50 different towns and cities where these grooming gangs have occurred. And of course, people just did not care about the working class white girls who were mostly being abused. That's been the real cause of the problem. And my mission at GB News with this documentary and this wider investigation was to shift that national conversation, was to restart it and to show to people that there was a bigger truth out there that they weren't being shown.
Well, Charlie, I have to say, I think you've done an absolutely brilliant job. You have shifted this agenda on, and we'll watch over the course of the next months and years to see just how much of a difference it makes. Thank you for joining me this evening, and well done on that conversation with Suella Braverman too. Well, it was Rotherham that first hit the headlines, and Rotherham wasn't just a domestic story, I have to say, all over the world. America in particular, people could not believe that this had happened. David Greenwood is a solicitor who represented 32 of the Rotherham victims, and he joins me now. David, has this all come many, many years too late?
Yes, of course. It's come 25, 30 years too late. Yeah, we should have been aware of what was going on many, many years ago, and the police should have been right on it back from the very start, yeah.
And it was, wasn't it? Fear of being called racist. Cowardice that led for this to persist year after year after year.
I wouldn't say that's the only factor. In Rotherham, in particular, the Labour Party relied on the Pakistani minority in that town for its votes. And there was, as Alexis J found in her report, some reticence by police and local authority staff to investigate these crimes for fear of rocking the boat in Rotherham. I don't know about other towns particularly in a lot of detail, but it was a mixture of that. It was a mixture of police feeling as though these crimes are too hard to deal with, and the complainants, the girls, were hard to handle, and a laziness on the part of the police and local authorities, and an unwillingness to get on with the essential job that they should have been doing.
Yeah, and when you look, David, at the list of proposals that are being put forward, a task force headed up by the National Crime Agency, and we've yet to see who the appointees to it are. Let's hope they're not part of the London metropolitan elite. When you look at the ethnicity data that police are now going to be tasked with, absolutely recording accurately and making available to the public, and one or two other of the recommendations, in your view of this, having studied this and fought hard for victims, how big a potential step in the right direction is this?
It could be a really big step in the right direction, but you speak, Nigel, as though this is some kind of victory and it's over and it could be sorted. It isn't. The National Crime Agency went into Rotherham with huge resources, and I doubt that those kinds of resources are going to be put into other towns and cities around the country where they are really needed. So let's see whether the government is really serious about this. They will need to put in a huge amount of money. The National Crime Agency in Rotherham and the support services that they brought with them were absolutely fantastic. They persuaded the girls to trust them, and they have got a lot of convictions so far and continue to get convictions. But it does need a massive amount of input.
Yeah, David, I was just playing devil's advocate with the argument and trying to give the government the benefit of the doubt. No, I have to say I'm rather with you. I think the resource that will be needed all over the country is not, absolutely enormous. But I also kind of feel rather like the boats crossing the channel that, the government are talking the language that the vast majority of people want to hear. The question of whether they can deliver is something else. A final thought, perhaps, from you in Rotherham. Do we think that this is now at a stop in Rotherham, or do you still have your suspicions?
I still have suspicions that it will be going on today, this evening, in parts of Rotherham and other towns and cities across the country.
Yeah, well, that is depressing. Well, look, the language has changed. It looks better than it did before. Well done for the work you've done in the past, and thank you for joining us tonight on the programme. So David Greenwood there making clear that in his view, there was also a political reason little was done, because in his words, the Labour Party in Rotherham relied on the votes from the Pakistani community, that it was just too tough, too difficult for the police and others to deal with. But there is no doubt that fear of being called racist was a major part of this. And you know something? It's going right through our national life. People are very,